Welcome to the Hero Maker podcast. I'm Andrea Schreeman, writer-director EP, living in LA.
I'm Jennifer Morrison, and I currently serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state of Vermont.
We are here to seek out and tell the full story of our friends who were murdered in college, Rachael Raver and Warren Fulton III.
We really need to make sure that their deaths were not in vain and that every possible lesson and improvement for the system can be squeezed from the retelling of the circumstances that ultimately led to the identification of their killer.
All right, we are back. Hero Maker podcast.
Today, we are super fortunate to have with us a retired investigator from Fairfax County, Virginia. Bob Murphy was one of the first cold case investigators in one of the first units in the United States. So cold case squads were not always a thing in American policing, and Bob was one of the first in a cold case squad. And one of his cases, in fact, a case he requested for reasons you will come to find out, was our friend Rachael and Warren's murder case. So we were super fortunate that Bob was willing to step out of retirement for a minute and share with us his personal and professional perspective on Rachael and Warren's case. But I do want to warn our audience, and a bit of a trigger warning. There is a lot of hardcore content in this episode, but it was also a really emotional case for Andrea and I. So the hosts had some emotional reactions to some of what we discussed. So there's probably no reason to think that our audience won't as well. So take care of yourself, friends. Stay safe, take care of each other, but give it a listen.
And also, before we get started here, just want to take a moment to thank everyone who donated to the podcast for Giving Tuesday this year. We had a really nice turnout for our very first Giving Tuesday. You can make tax-deductible donations to the podcast through our website. Just go to theheromakerpodcast.com/support if you didn't get a chance to donate this year and would like to help us continue doing these interviews. Thank you to Bob Murphy. Thank you to our donors. Thank you to our listeners. And here we go.
As you probably know, Virginia has abolished the death penalty. We don't have it now. It's not available in Virginia anymore. It's gone. So that's not one of the options for a jury to even offer to somebody like Prieto. But I mean, when you look at what Prieto did and how many people he affected, how many people he hurt, including his own family and people that were close to him, the pain he caused is just immeasurable. And then you just look at Rachel's case alone, and the case is just so tragic. You know, you look at who she was, where she was going, the potential she had, and it was all just taken away for his own pleasure, his own desires. And he did this over and over again. We know he killed at least 10 people. We know that. I suspect there's many more than that.
Yeah.
We'll never know now. But 10 people, just evil, just pure evil.
Yeah, you're not the first person who's used that exact description of pure evil, no redeeming value, didn't even seek forgiveness, didn't try to offer any apologies or closure to folks.
No, he didn't.
You bring up that there are 10 people that we know that he killed. And on record, there are 9. Can you just say a little bit about this 10th body, which I think is an unknown, unsolved murder?
Right. That would be the one in D.C., correct? You know about the other 9.
I know. Yes, I know about the other 9. I know about the guy the car that was set on fire in Virginia.
Yes. Manuel Cerminho.
Yeah, Manuel Cerminho. His name is in the records, and because the DNA is connected. But you're bringing up a 10th person that is not on any of the records.
That's true, and I honestly believe it's a murder he committed in D.C. The interviews that we conducted, gosh, so many years ago, there was a Spanish newspaper in Arlington, and Manuel Cerminho worked for that newspaper and had friends there, and he had shared some tidbits of information with different people. And in those interviews, we learned that he was good friends with Alfredo Prieto. They went to DC often, and then all of a sudden something happened. Everybody noticed there was a change in Cerminho's behavior, and he became very afraid. He didn't want to hang out with Alfredo Prieto anymore. And then he shared something about how he had witnessed Prieto kill a man in DC and dump the body in a dumpster. And then shortly after that, his body was found in a car that was set on fire in Prince William County. And there was a ballistics match, same gun from Rachael and Warren. So that's how we tied it to Prieto.
That was Manuel who was killed with the same gun?
Yes, that was Manuel.
Okay, I got you.
So the case in DC, this is back in, like 89, 90, back when crack was everywhere down there. And they were averaging basically a murder a day in DC. And I still think it's an unsolved murder in DC.
Wow.
I remember when we went to school there that they used to call, they used to call Washington, D.C. the murder capital of the world.
They did. Yeah, because it was. There was more murder there per capita than any other city in the country. Yeah, and they were well over a murder a day there for a while. I think at the height, it was 400 and some murders, I think, in a year they had. It was just crazy down there. It was the wild, wild west for a while before they finally turned it around.
Was this about the same time that our illustrious mayor, Marion Barry, was snorting lines of cocaine and stuff? Is that about the same time frame?
It is exactly the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
It's that era that we're talking.
When we first started talking, you mentioned something that really spoke to me right away as an investigator. I just to share a little tidbit, I served as the director of the countywide sex crimes and child abuse unit for several years at one point during my career. And you spoke right off the bat about the team that you were a part of. And I could tell by the way you were talking that you probably had a similarly positive experience being part of a multidisciplinary team the way I did at the sex crimes unit.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more. In my mind, I'm picturing a cold case unit or a detective squad, and that you were supported by prosecutors and victim services. And tell me a little bit more about the team that helped you do the work.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The team that I was lucky enough to be part of, every member of that team was at the top of their game. You mentioned the victim witness support we got. Sally Fayez, I think probably you've talked to Sally. I have never met anyone better at her job than Sally. I mean, Sally was just absolutely wonderful, just a compassionate person, good person, and does a lot of good work. She actually went to California with us, on one of our investigative trips. And, she was in the car with us when we were doing some of these interviews. That's above and beyond really to ask of a victim witness advocate to do that. But that's how heavily invested in the cases she was. When we brought all the witnesses out to Fairfax for the trials, Sally was the one picking them up at the airport, bringing them to court, taking them to dinner, taking them on tours of DC. She gave so much of herself to these folks.
That's incredible.
And it was all for the good of the case, obviously. And she never complained. She never said, "Oh, I'm not getting enough sleep," or you never heard anything like that from Sally. She was just there every step of the way. And the people that I worked with, it was just wonderful to know there were other brains around you that you could bounce things off of. And they were going to bounce things back to you that you'd never thought of. Or they would come up with ideas and we would bat those ideas around and then we would dismiss them. Say, no, that's not plausible. That's not feasible. We're going to set that aside. So we really didn't get radar lock on any crazy theories or anything like that. I feel like the collective brain kept us all on the right track with this. There was one detective I worked with from Texas originally, fluent in Spanish, just worked well with everybody. He had made trips to Salvador. So he had intimate knowledge of Salvador. And, not just like the capital Salvador, but, like the small towns and, the crime and the things down in Salvador. So he really could talk to a lot of people and had the experiences to draw on to talk to these people. And he was just a wealth of knowledge. And he was very helpful. And in fact, you probably know on the plane ride back from California to Virginia with Prieto, he sat with Prieto. And Prieto had already invoked, he had already said, "I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer." I mean, Prieto had been in prison a long time at that point, and he was very refined. He knew his rights. He knew what to say and what not to say, but he couldn't resist talking
Yeah.
to this detective in Spanish. And they talked about anything and everything. They talked about politics. They talked about things happening in the world, everything. So little did he know, he was demonstrating that he was not mentally incapacitated, that he had the ability for complex thought and speech and
Yeah.
conversation. So, I mean, that detective that did that was just extremely smart.
Is that Rick Perez? Is that right?
Yes, that's Richard Perez. Yep,
Yeah, and I think
Rich Perez.
he's still working, isn't he?
He's actually, I think, a major now with the police department. He's done quite well. Yeah.
This is a really important fact that you're bringing up because it was one of the things that the defense team tried. They really tried hard
Absolutely.
to keep Prieto off of death row. Certainly, they were arguing that he had some kind of, like you described, mental incapacitation. You know, I don't want to jump ahead because you worked on this case for a long time.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting
Yeah.
origin stories. Actually, I guess I'll tee you up right here. Can you tell us about the first time that you met Alfredo Prieto?
Oh, yeah. Okay. The first time. Well, the first time he wasn't Alfredo Prieto. Gosh, what was his name that he used? Hernandez. Um, yes. So if we go back, my goodness, if my memory serves me right, I think it was January 1990. I was working sex crimes at the time. So I was working rape cases. And one night, got a call out in the middle of the night. They called up and said, hey, we need you to go out on a case. We had a woman come to the police station here in Fairfax. She self-reported, and she said that she just got away from a guy, and she had been abducted the day before, taken back to his apartment. She was held there overnight where she was raped repeatedly, and then he took her back to his car and let her go. So it was just a bizarre story. So I went out with another detective, and I was a junior detective. So I was with the senior detective, and we began to interview this lady, and her first name was Suzette. So we interviewed Suzette, and she said she was going down 66 in Fairfax County, I-66, and someone bumped her from behind. So she thought someone had, run into her. So she pulled off to the side of the road, and the guy came up to her window, and he stuck what she described as a huge handgun revolver, which sounds like what he was using back then, in her face, and demanded that she get in his car. So she leaves her car on the side of 66. They get in his car, and he takes her back to his apartment in Manassas, Virginia, which is in Prince William County. And he holds her overnight. And she decided that to try to survive this ordeal, she was going to treat it like it was a date and try to throw him off his game. Well, it worked. She was friendly with him. She went along with everything. She didn't resist anything. So he began to open up and talk with her a little bit. And then the next day, he took her back to her car and let her go. So she was able to take us back to the apartment and show us the apartment where this had occurred. Okay. So ultimately, we went back to that apartment, knocked on the door, and a man answered the door. He gave us a Virginia driver's license. I think that the name was Hernandez on the driver's license. And he told us a story that was plausible. He says, oh, I know her. We're friends. I've got her phone number. And he produced her phone number, which was correct. And he said, yeah, we met. We were here. Everything that happened here was consensual. And, she went home. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no problem. So we were perplexed. I believed Suzette. I think she was telling the truth. Some people didn't 100% believe her. And I think they were a little tough on her, in some of the interviews with Suzette. But Suzette stuck to her guns, good for her. She was even polygraphed at one point, to verify her story, which I thought was maybe going a little too far, but she passed polygraph. And she's like, I'll do whatever you need me to do, but I'm telling you the truth. She's very believable. So, such a bizarre case. You're trying to make something out of it. We went to the prosecutor and we laid it out to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor's like, I don't know what I have here. I've got proof problems. This is going to be really hard to prove, because he's going to say it's consensual. And after a couple of weeks, we went back to that same prosecutor, who was a good prosecutor, is now the judge. And we told the prosecutors, like, look, we feel like we have something here. We need to arrest this guy. We need to bring him in, do an interview with him. And he said, all right, he authorized a warrant for assault and battery. So that's the best we could get at the time. So he gave us a warrant for assault and battery. We got the warrant. We went down to Manassas to look for him, and he was gone. So at that point, I still didn't know who he was. I thought he was this guy, Hernandez. So it wasn't until 2005, 15 years later, that we finally find out who Alfredo Prieto is. As soon as we get the DNA hit, we get a name, we know where he is, we start researching him. We realize the case that he had been involved in, back in 1990, the Woodruff case and all that in California. And I talked to the detective, and he says, I'll send you my whole case file and you can sift through it. And he says, he's from Virginia, right? And I said, no. I said, I didn't know he's from Virginia. He says, well, he's got ties to Virginia. So we're like, well, great. It's like, send us the case file. So he sent his entire case file out there. I'm flipping through the case file. I'll find a Virginia driver's license in there, and it's Hernandez with Prieto's picture on it. So I'm sitting there looking at that. I mean, that was just, you could hear me yell down the hallway. It's like, I couldn't believe it. I said some words, some of them started with F, but I was dumbfounded, that I had talked to this guy. I sat with this guy 15 years prior. Then I'm sitting there thinking, why couldn't we have caught him then? Why couldn't we have arrested him then? Why couldn't we have locked him down, done something, to keep this guy off the streets? That was just uncanny. Those circles. I'm like, how does that happen? How does that circle like that occur? And
that is small world.
Oh, we crossed a path with the guy that's a killer, and then 15 years you're with him again.
Well, how many years were you on the cold case for Rachael and Warren? Like, how many years had you been plugging away at that before that revelation came?
Yeah, I started working on Rachael's case in 1999. So 9 years later, I picked up Rachael and Warren's case, and everybody knew Rachael and Warren's case. I remember the day it happened. The day it happened, I was a stolen car detective. I was working auto theft. But everybody knew about the case, and everybody was working on it and trying to come up with something, innovative to help solve that case. So I was in stolen cars in, the 88, 89, those years when it happened. And then I went to sex crimes, and I worked sex crimes. And then I went to homicide. And then ultimately in 1999, I went to cold case homicide. And that's when, one of the first cases I wanted to pick up and work on was Rachael's and Warren's. And that's when I picked it up in 99. And so, in 1999, that's when in Virginia, CODIS was coming into being. The combined DNA index system, the nationwide DNA data bank. So in 1999, I resubmitted Rachael's and Warren's case because we knew there was genetic material there. We knew that. And sure enough, there was. It took a year before finally the lab got back with us and said, we've got good news and bad news. They said, the good news is we've got a DNA match on your case. We're like, great, who is it? They said, well, it's not a who, it's a what, it's another case. Mm-hmm. So, and that was Veronica Jefferson's case in Arlington. So that's when we started working with Arlington County PD, and we started comparing notes and comparing those cases. And as you know, Veronica Jefferson is African-American female. Rachael's Caucasian female, but very dissimilar. You wouldn't expect, you're the same perpetrator for those two cases, but it was matched in DNA. So we worked together on that case, gosh, from 2000 to 2005, trying to figure it out, and came up with just hundreds and hundreds of suspects. The good thing is we had the DNA. So we could get DNA from the suspect and eliminate it. And that's what we did with all those people. We eliminated a lot of people, through DNA. Until, finally one day out of the blue, I got the call from the lab again. They said, we got a hit on a guy in prison. He's sitting in prison in California on death row, and he's been there since 1990. So we're like, the whole time we've been running around chasing our tails, he's been sitting in San Quentin prison in California. And it took an act of legislature in California to submit prisoners' DNA to the DNA database for us to finally get that information. Because they realized, they had the database going too, but they hadn't submitted any of their previously convicted offenders. So finally, somebody realized they needed to do that. As soon as they did that, we got the match. I've been talking a lot. Sorry.
No, that's exactly what we're here for. Let me ask you this. How many detectives globally in the Detective Bureau might there have been around the time you were moving through the different units? Like 100 detectives, 200 detectives?
You mean my police department?
Yeah.
120.
120 detectives. And you, by the first contact with this guy while you're in the sex crimes unit, you've moved to homicide and now to another unit, and it comes full circle. Like,
right.
What are the chances of this?
Oh, you don't know how many times I've thought about that in my own mind. It's like, what are the chances of this? What made this happen?
I can't imagine how this journey must have been for you in retrospect. That it's almost like, in a police way, it's almost like winning the World Series, being able to bring closure to a case that you now realize you had so many intersections with. I mean, at the end of the day, closing cases with a positive outcome, because you're never going to undo the bad act that got you into the case in the first place, right? But being able to bring closure and hold someone accountable is a home run. And I experienced that a lot in the sex crimes and child abuse unit, particularly with really gruesome child sexual abuse cases, that there was literally no better feeling than finding an offender of these terrible cases and bringing closure and letting people move on to the next chapter. And
right,
that must have been great for you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That feeling, the feeling of fulfillment, that you feel like you've really done something worthwhile and something good. Not to sound corny, but seeking justice.
Yeah, work that matters. All the nights, weekends, holidays, and everything is it sort of like, that's the trade-off, is when you have those moments. When I think about your work on a cold case, I've never been a cold case investigator. I wonder if you could describe a little bit for us how it differed from your work in some of the other units. Mm-hmm. And as you think about the Rachael and Warren case, you said that this was you knew you wanted to work on that case. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what some of the most memorable pieces of that case were, what drove you to want to really work on it. But maybe we can just start with the first question about, like, how does cold case investigation differ from regular homicide?
Sure. Like regular homicide, the case occurs, you get called out, you're reactive. Everything just happened. It's fresh. It's fresh on everyone's memory. Everything that happened is right there in front of you. You just follow the facts at that point and see where they take you. With cold case, it's different. Relationships change. People's change. Their outlooks change. Everything changes in cold case. A lot of times for the better, to help you in these cases. To work a cold case, what we found, the first thing you have to do is you have to immerse yourself in that case. So you just have to get all the files, and lots of times there's many, many boxes of files. You have to get all the files, just take them somewhere in a quiet room, start unpacking them, and just start going through every single shred of paper. And sometimes we had one cold case, I still remember, the big break in the case was on a sticky note in the case file. It had a name in a sticky note. And on that sticky note turned out to be the guy that did it. So you have to go through every single shred of paper in that case file and look at everything. Look at all the notes, all the handwritten notes, everything. And then you go back. Once you have all that, you've immersed yourself in it. Now it consumes you. So now you find yourself sitting at the dinner table, staring off in space, thinking about that case and thinking about what about this or what about that? And then you have a real good mental picture of what's going on there in that case, and you start developing theories and you work through those theories of what happened and what could have happened. But you go back out and you re-interview people. You interview everybody that's been interviewed, and then you look for people that were never interviewed. And lots of times the people that you re-interview, they'll tell you more now, 15, 20 years after the fact than they did back when it happened. And sometimes they'll even tell you, I never told anybody this, but I've thought about it a lot over the years, and now I'm going to tell you. And it turns out to be, something really beneficial to the case. But that's what we find ourselves doing with these cold cases, is just getting immersed in them like that. In Rachel's case, honestly, I have to tell you, it's like the thing that solved Rachel's case really was science. It was DNA. It's not like I did any great fantastic job of investigative work and went out and did the magic interview. And so I know it was science. We took what we had, we resubmitted it. And I have to give kudos to the lab techs that were doing the work and finding the DNA, separating it, and then loading it into CODIS. And that's really where they put us on the track. They gave us a name. They're like, hey, this is who did it. Go prove it. So then our job became, how do we prove this guy did it? I mean, he's going to have a hard time explaining how and why his DNA got there, but you have to try to figure out what's this guy doing here in Virginia. We went down that journey with basically almost just profiling this guy, going back to the very beginning, from when did he come into country? How did he come into country? Where did he come into country? What did he do? How did he grow up? And that's where Rich Perez, going out to California with us, out in like Pomona, California, where he came into California. And he was introduced to the gangs, Pomona, North Side, PNS tattooed right across his back. That's where he was introduced to the gang life, age 15. And that's kind of what set him down that road. Then you start realizing all these things, and then you start digging and digging and digging, and you find out that he has a father that was in California and now lives in Arlington. Okay. And where does the father work? Dulles Airport, cutting grass. So now where Rachael and Warren's bodies were found was right off the Dulles Toll Road, which connects Washington, D.C. to Dulles Airport. And they mowed grass there. So it turns out, Prieto worked with his father. And then we started to build a timeline. It was really interesting to be able to fill in that timeline. And that's where we found out things like Manuel Cerminho, things like that. We'd have a gap in the timeline. What was he doing during this gap in the timeline? Where was he? Things like that. And leading us all the way up to January of 1990 with Suzette case in Fairfax County with the rape. And then he goes back to California.
Isn't it a little weird that he had already raped and murdered multiple women and then he did not murder Suzette? Like that's a disjointed timeline in my estimation and experience.
It absolutely is. It's abnormal. She's an outlier. She survived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then for me, that raises the question of how many other people did he rape and potentially murder between Rachael and Warren's death and the Suzette thing, which was a year? Two?
Well, December of 88, and you're saying January of 1990, so 14 months.
Right. There has to be some out there. There has to be, because a predator like this, he's not going to stop what he's doing
until he gets stopped.
If you or someone you know is connected either personally or as the result of violent crime to Alfredo Prieto, a convicted rapist and killer who lived in and around San Bernardino, California, Arlington, Virginia, and Jamaica, Queens, New York, between the years of 1984 and 1990, we'd like to hear from you. please email us at info@theheromakerpodcast.com. You talked about that Suzette described that her car was tapped from the back, and this was like his technique for abducting her.
Right.
And I wonder, for us, for me and for Jennifer and for our friends, there's always been this big question mark, and maybe it always will continue to be. Did anyone ever observe how they intersected with Prieto, how that ever happened? Or does that just not matter? It's like, well, what we're really dealing with is we need to prove that this guy did it, and that, how that happened doesn't really figure into this.
That trip, that car up there is important. And that was his girlfriend that he had, Alicia Hernandez. She had family in New York, and she did testify. And I think she told us a whole lot more off the record than she did on the stand. But they went up to New York to see some of her relatives in the car that night. And he called her and said, "Hey, we're going to New York. I need you to follow me." And he drove a car, and she drove her car and followed him. And we're convinced that's when he took the car to New York. And she described it as a small brown car. It's like, that's when he took the car to New York. So those little tidbits of information, we tried to fill it in. We couldn't fill it all in. And then the car gets a parking ticket on it a day or two after the murders occurred.
Right.
So the car is up there. Within like 48 hours, the car is there and gets a parking ticket on it. And it wasn't in NCIC then yet, because Warren and Rachael weren't reported missing until, I think, Sunday. Yeah, Sunday. They got reported missing on Sunday, and there was a delay of getting the car entered and all. It was just, almost a comedy of errors, that those things occurred the way they did. When we finally got up there to get the car, there were 10 or 12 parking tickets on the car. They just continually put parking tickets on it. But there was less and less of the car there. The tags were gone. You could have run the VIN, I suppose, to try to determine the origin of that car. But
That's a classic not my job, because the parking enforcement personnel, they're just getting another stat, so to speak. They're pumping the tickets out. That's their job. It's not necessarily their job to determine, why is this burnt out hulk of a vehicle here
from Virginia.
Right.
I do want to share that just hearing that piece of it for me about what Alicia said, that she told you he called and he said, "We're going to New York," and even just getting that amount of information, it's helping me just have something else to hold on to that I didn't know before. That is part of the transition, I guess, of everything that happened, because I guess that not knowing stuff, not knowing is so weird and so hard around this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how meaningful it was to hear even just that little bit. So thank you.
Yeah, we've all struggled since the day it happened, and even to this day. We've all struggled with how did they go from a bar where we were all hanging out, and they were the responsible ones who left early so that they could go to a church function with Warren's parents the next day.
Right.
Or the rest of the gang stayed out till last call. What happened between the responsible 20-somethings, athletic, can hold their own young adults, left the bar?
Right.
How did this happen? Like, that has always haunted all of us. And it also contributed to this incredible sense that our little bubble down at GW was no longer safe. Because if it could happen to a young woman with a big strapping athlete boyfriend, it could happen to two soccer players, or a soccer player and a gymnast out together. The not knowing contributed to a lot of fear in real time.
I can see where it would. Yeah. So Jen, you were at Mr. Day's bar that night?
I don't have a specific recollection of being there that night. And I just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something we've pondered a lot too, thinking about the case. How did Prieto, who's not a big guy, he's like 5'6", 145 pounds. How did that guy, get the drop on Warren?
Yeah.
Who's like 6'2", 220 pounds, and Rachael, who's an athlete. How did he get them to get in the car? And the only thing we kept coming back to was the equalizer, the gun.
The hog leg. It sounded like he had a straight up 357 hog leg, like you see in the heat of the night or something.
Right. The gun. It had to have been the gun. I mean, he commanded them to do, and they did it, and they got in the car, and then we're like, well, okay, who drove? Who drove the car? Where did he sit? Did he sit in the back with a gun on somebody? And how did all that happen? We just know that it did.
And I think also about their characters, and that they were very generous, giving, would help anybody. I feel like if he used his charisma, which apparently he had some, because he gave you all a nice show when you came to see him at his place in Manassas, right?
He was very convincing.
So, I mean, he also could have played some part, like, I need help with something. That could have been another approach that I could see, he might have had the ability.
Yeah, I don't know. Those are facts we don't know. And those are facts that I've always wondered about. If they had known what was about to happen, they would have done something. That.
They would have fought. Yep.
Because there was evidence that at a certain point, both of them ran, right?
Well, yeah. We know from the crime scene that Warren's body we found first. And when the caretaker went on the property, I think it was Tuesday morning, they went missing Saturday night, Sunday morning. When the caretaker went on the property on Tuesday, he found Warren's body first. And he was wearing, a yellow jacket, that I think was Rachel's, that he'd borrowed from Rachael that night. But he shot in the back, and looking at the scene, it looks like he was made to kneel, and then he shot fairly close to the road, far enough off the road to where you couldn't see him, but fairly close to the road. So it looks like Prieto, they stop the car, they get out of the car, he walks them in, and then at that point, he shoots and he kills Warren right there. And I think that really demonstrates to most people, it's like, okay, what Prieto's motive is at that point. Warren, unfortunately, was simply in the way. And he was eliminating the athletic guy, the big guy, the guy that could stop this, the guy that could hurt him. He's going to take care of that threat first, and he did. So then further into the field, if this is too much, too painful, tell me to stop.
You can put earmuffs on, Streams. I can probably handle this, so you can put earmuffs on.
No, I want to hear it. I'm sorry that I'm just so reactive.
Well, and these facts were heard by a jury, and I think these facts, I think they upset a lot of jurors, rightfully so. They should, but the jurors needed to hear this, and they heard it. So further into that field where Rachael was found, some distance from Warren, you could see to where she was forced to walk further away from Warren's body. And then we find a pile of clothing, and we find where she took her clothing off, her underwear, her pants. She took everything off except I think she had a leather jacket on. She left her blouse and her leather jacket on. And then you can see where it looks like she realized, I think at that point, it's like, I've got to go. I've got to try to run. And she did. It looks like she ran, because based on the ballistics evidence, it looked like there was a gunshot wound to her back, lower back. It was intermediate distance. It was like 15, 20 feet away. Okay. Where Warren's was, like 18 inches away. So she had created a little bit of distance from him, it looked like, when he shot her in the back. So, the animal that he is, it wasn't an immediate killing wound.
Right.
The medical examiner testified, it took her several minutes to die. And some of the scratches on the body, so you can see where he dragged her. After he shot her, he dragged her. And there's linear scratches on the body. And they're inflamed.
Yep.
So,
release.
she was still alive.
Yep.
The inflammatory response.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see these long linear scratches on her body. Okay. And he takes her to a point to where he's going to rape her. And he does. And he rapes her. So one of the facts that the medical examiner and the prosecutor were able to drive home to the jurors, trying this case, was the last thing Rachael saw in this life, in her life, was Prieto on top of her. I don't think the jurors had a lot of issue with coming to a unanimous decision of death penalty for them after they heard those facts. What he put them through.
Yeah, and I think we knew most of those facts, but not like in this specific detail. Like we knew she had been raped, that she had been shot and then raped. I think I thought she had been shot a second time. Is that not true?
It's not true. Just one time.
Okay.
Yeah, just one time.
When I think about that, and I know that these cases, the really gruesome cases that I was involved in, either directly or tangentially over my career, I know that sometimes in my retirement, i.e., not actively on the job anymore, doing other work, a lot of stuff seemed to get unpackaged after I'd been retired a while. Like I'd wake up with dreams and I'd wake up with a particular case in mind, but something would be happening in my dream and it was almost like filling in blanks or processing and trying to file away certain cases that you never had time to process. It sounded to me earlier, like when you were talking about we just kept trying to fill in the timeline. That's what reminded me of that thing that I started to experience about 6 weeks after I retired from full-time police work.
Right.
I just wondered if, given that you worked on so many big cases, that maybe you had a similar experience in retirement where your brain worked in mysterious ways.
I am now, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this to Andrea earlier when we talked, is like, none of this stuff bothered me when I was working these cases, because you were driven, you were on the hunt, you were chasing the bad guy, and you were able to compartmentalize all of these things. And so you saw them, you recorded them, you stuck them in the back of your brain, and then you kept chasing the bad guy.
Because there was always another bad guy. Yeah.
Always. That. Those cases never stop. They just never stop. So eventually what happens is you stop. You retire. Now, I hate to say it, those things do come back. Those cases, and the psychologists all tell you, it's like, you better deal with the trauma now or you're going to deal with it later. Well,
they were
hate to say
right.
it, they're right.
I agree. Well, we don't want to cause you to have trauma, but the reality is you already had the trauma. You're now unpackaging it in whatever way it is that you're dealing with it, right? Like for me, it was a lot of dreams,
I agree.
really active dreams. I would wake up drenched in tears. I would wake up in a cold sweat because I was in a certain part of one of the cases. I had physiological responses in my sleep. I'd yell out, and then I would know which case it was that I was kind of reliving that day or that night, and it would stay with me all day. But it was sort of also God's way of putting things into a file and tucking them away somewhere, because I never had the same case nightmare, for lack of a better word, twice.
Okay. This is your way of dealing with it.
I think everybody's is different, but I guess the point is that I don't think we really realize what we saw and the amount of depravity that we were witness to until after you stop being on the job. And then you're left with this
I agree.
pile of feels to sift through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you throw a bunch of retired detectives in a room and sit around and listen to what they talk about. They're still talking about those cases, that they worked 20, 25 years ago, like it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And is that something that actually you do? Do you kibitz with the guys? Do you hang out with the guys and have coffee? And
We do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we get together and we talk about stuff. And it's funny, you can always tell which case affected which guy the most, because that's the case that guy talks about.
Andrea, I have to jump off in like 5 minutes and I want to leave you guys to it, but I got a question I got to ask him.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I think about this a lot and people have asked me this, so I want to ask you, knowing what you know now about the job, what would you tell your younger self, the you who started out in the first time you moved from, say, the auto theft unit into crimes against persons? Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger detective self?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I was so driven as a detective. There were a lot of things I sacrificed, like my family, like my kids. Thank God for my wife. She stayed home with our kids and she raised our kids. So when I got that call in the middle of the night, I could run out and do this. But I look back at it now and I feel like I should have had a better balance maybe with my family, my home life, and chasing bad guys. Because I feel like maybe they sacrifice things, to allow me to do this. But I don't know. It's a tough one because you're right. You mentioned earlier the sense of fulfillment you get is just such a good feeling to know that it's like we got him, we got this guy that's caused all this pain. And you sit there with the family and you live with the family and you talk with them and they become like your family, like Dee Dee Raver and Matt Raver and gosh, their mother, just a wonderful lady.
Mm-hmm.
You just get to know them, so well, and they're just such good people. You just want to be able to give them this. It's like, hey, we know who did this, and then to be able to piece it together and tell them what happened. Because Andrew, you're right. I mean, the way I process stuff like this is I need the facts. I need to know exactly what happened from start to finish to be able to process it. And I think that's what a lot of folks like that need. They need the facts to be able to process.
Yeah, to start wrapping around towards closure.
Right.
Bob, this has been an honor, really. I'm so appreciative of your work and of the fact that you cared so much about our friends.
Thank you.
Even though you didn't know them in life, thank you for the care. And I know you poured that same love and attention into all of your cases, but to us, it means an extra special amount because they were wonderful.
Well, thank you very much for saying that.
Wonderful, vibrant people who were taken from us way too soon.
I agree.
The Williamson County Cultural Arts Commission of Franklin, Tennessee wishes to thank our men and women in blue who help us deliver safe and fun family and community cultural events year-round, including one of the only authentic bluegrass festivals in the country. Bluegrass Along the Harpeth takes place every July and at the Williamson County Fair in August and at the annual Tennessee International Independent Film Festival. Check out our full calendar of events at wccac-tn.org.
Thank you so much. That was really, I'm grateful that you showed up and hey, you kept it together.
Sure. I didn't keep it all together. I don't know if you noticed.
I saw a little bit. I get the big award for the tears. We definitely want to get the case files at some point, and we're going to be talking to some cool people on the West Coast soon.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely a West Coast connection. I remember we talked to Prieto's brother at one point in New Mexico.
I actually talked to him.
Okay.
I talked to him.
Okay.
Are you talking about Guillermo?
Yes, Guillermo. Yes. So you talked to Guillermo.
It was an interesting. I talked to him this past week. He is 2 weeks away from retiring, and he had a really unique perspective. Obviously, I think a lot of people have a question of how can two people with the same experiences in life, biographical experiences, witnessing the same stuff that they witnessed in Salvador.
Right.
The execution of their grandfather, which was very impactful on all the kids, having a father arrested, having a mother move to the United States and having to figure out life by themselves as kids on the street in San Salvador. These same biographical experiences, how can they end up so differently? How can Guillermo and the other brothers and sisters have functional, good lives, make money, have kids, have families, and then why does someone like Freddie go so wrong?
Right.
He was pretty cool about answering those questions and what he thought contributed to that. He definitely thought drugs had a lot to do with it. But yeah, he said he's not sure he wants to talk to us because he has grandchildren. He doesn't want them to know anything about this part of their family's past.
Right.
But he said he would be open to talking to me again.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was his opinion on his brother's execution? How did he feel about that?
Pretty much one of the first things he said to me was that the whole family felt that it had contributed to his mother's rapid decline in dementia. That since 2015, that his mother had not been well. But that's an interesting question from you. Something that you're interested in knowing, how his brother's execution affected the family.
Right. It is, because that was not lost on us. We knew that he had a family. I mean, we went out and talked to a lot of them. We met with them, and yeah, they seemed to be pretty decent people, except for his father. His father, when we talked to his father, he was in prison for rape. But
I understood that his father had also been jailed for murder as well, or was it just rape?
There was something like that. Was it a murder or a manslaughter or something like that?
I think so. But you remember
Yeah.
talking to his father?
I do. Yeah. And he looked like an older version of Freddie. Yeah, the same cavalier attitude, really wasn't going to help us. Just kind of like toying with us for entertainment to pass the time, that type thing. It was not interested in providing any compassion or help to anyone. It was more, what's in it for me, just very selfish.
I guess it's natural to try to ask these questions about why does a person become like this?
Yeah. No, I mean, it would be a great psychological study for someone. I always thought that. What exactly makes him tick? Why is he the way he was? And the attorneys, the two defense attorneys that he had, Jonathan Shapiro and Peter Greenspun, great attorneys, well-known attorneys, some of the best attorneys in the country. And they did a really good job, laying all that out there. But nobody ever really got into the nuts and bolts of what made him like that.
Yeah, I spoke with Jonathan Shapiro.
Oh, did you?
I did. Yeah, that is not an admirable job. And he did not have positive things to say about the criminal justice system. I think he called it a bloodbath.
He was pretty passionate about it. You could tell he was a true believer, from his side. And if I was Prieto, that's what I would want. That's who I would want representing me.
He needed the most rigorous defense.
Yes. And he got a good one. He really did.
And when I did start talking to Jonathan, he said, first of all, I'm not going to talk about guilt or innocence. That was the first thing he said to me. And then he said, I just don't believe in the death penalty. Nobody deserves to die. But pretty much to a T, every other person I've met has said, if ever the death penalty was created for a human, it was for this person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's the guy. Yeah.
There's one person we haven't talked about at all, who I think is really integral in the success of putting this guy away not once, but twice. And that's Lisa. And if she comes to talk to us, it may be anonymously. I'm not sure if we'll ever get to talk to her. I hope we do, at least get to meet her. But the courage that it took for her to testify, not once, but twice, seems notable.
It was. And she did some soul searching to come to that decision. That was not an easy decision for her. And I respect that. But I think she did it for her friend. And I think she did it for Rachael and Warren too, when she realized, the gravity of everything, how enormous, this was, that, from coast to coast and all the people in between. I think she realized it was something that she needed to do. And she did it, and she did a good job of it. And I think because of her, we were able to tell the Woodruff girl's story about what happened to her. And then we were able to compare, like Rachel's case and Tina's case and the Woodruff girl's case, would compare all three of those cases and see how similar they all were. And just the ripples that went out from each one of those cases. So many people were affected by it. But yeah, she needs to be commended for what she did. She did a good job. She did a good thing.
Yeah. I just wonder, sometimes I feel like what I'm doing is, my hope is that in sitting down and having conversations with people, that there can be another layer of healing, whatever that means for each individual person, or people listening, or people who haven't felt safe to come forward and share their little piece of the story. And I'm just realizing now, like, part of your gift in your work was listening, right?
Oh, thank you. That's probably one of the biggest compliments I think you could give anybody, to tell them they're a good listener.
And I just wonder if you have any advice for me, for us, as we move forward and continue to create a space where people can share what there is to share and take that next step forward in their healing, or in giving something to the people that are coming after us to make policing and public safety and criminal justice the next iteration of good and better. Do you have anything you want to say to the system, or anything that you want to advise me in terms of how we move forward with this?
Yeah, that's tough. I think what you're doing is very honorable. You're telling the story of people that never got to tell their story through life. So you're telling their story. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think there's a lot that could be learned from what you're telling. I also think that what you're telling, what you're putting out there, is very thought-provoking. I think it's going to cause people to think, maybe deep thought. It has me. I mean, you've made me think about things that I haven't thought about in years. And some of them are painful, but I'm reminded that there are people out there that are just good people, and they want to do the right thing. Every person you talk to has they have these deep, intimate facts of the case that are lost on everybody else because they weren't there, they didn't experience it, they didn't see it, they didn't record it in their memory. But you're bringing all those things out. Now people are seeing all those different perspectives. And I hope, you talk about the future of law enforcement. Boy, I don't know. I don't know what the future of law enforcement is, but I hope the future of law enforcement doesn't become antiseptic and sterile to the point that we lose sight of that. The fact that you need to have a connection with the person you're talking to, and to be able to allow them to talk to you and talk about those things that they're feeling, the things that they saw. And if you listen closely, there's just so much you can learn from that. You're like Lisa. I mean, you could just, in talking with her, you could just see her. She went right back to that night, and she started walking through it. And you could see her living through that night again and talking about those memories. But she wanted to, and I think it helped her, on some level. And it helped us immensely, presenting the case and presenting the facts and getting the truth out there. So I don't know. That's my explanation. I don't know if that made any sense or not.
It made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense. Yeah, there's something miraculous about that. As human beings, we get to sit with each other and have a moment and hold space for each other.
Right.
And if that can put away a bad guy, great. If that can make your life a little better, because you got to, in this conversation, remember these heroes, and that you weren't alone in this journey. If you can remember friendship.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That human connection, it's just, it's hard to put your thumb on it, but that human connection. And when you go through these journeys and you get to the end, you're like, I am now. I look back on these things and I realized I grew from that. It shaped me, I think, into a better person. You certainly have more empathy, I think, for people when you see those things and you realize what's happened and what those people had to live through. It just, I think that you grow from it. You can't help it. You have to grow from it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for seeing us, and of course for the great work you did, and please thank your wife. Thank your wife that we got to borrow you for a few hours.
I sure will. All right. Well, good luck with your project.
Thanks. We'll stay in touch. Thank you so much, Bob. Thanks to sound mixer and podcast producer Michael Doherty, sound designer Andy Bill of Submachine Audio, and graphic designer Jungleen Bay. Thanks also to me, Hero Maker director and producer Andrea Schreeman. Please subscribe to the show where you listen to podcasts and take a moment to rate us. It really helps the podcast grow. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Hero Maker Pod. Want to collaborate or suggest a guest? Please email us at media@theheromakerpodcast.com. The Hero Maker Podcast is a production of Prudent Pictures. Thank you so much for listening.